So what prompted Just Futures Kingston to embark on a tenant survey, and what were you hoping might come of it?
Well, it's obvious if you've listened to the news at all, you know, that housing, as Dylyn said, is completely unaffordable for most people. Vacancy rates are very low. Landlords are making record profits off the backs of tenants. And we wanted to know what the lay of the land was in Kingston. So I thought the best way to do that was to speak to tenants directly through a survey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to add to that, like, we know so much about rental housing on a larger scale, on a national scale, from groups such as like the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. They do these broad surveys of rental housing landscape. However, we don't know more granular things about what it's like to be a renter in Kingston. Through some of the advocacy that we've done with Just Futures, we found city staff and councillors, as well as community members, asking, like, do you have information about this kind of tenancy in Kingston? Do you know how many units of this are available in Kingston? Just trying to understand what it looks like in Kingston for us, so we can make choices, informed choices, and policy decisions is really essential.
So you're saying there's a knowledge gap that,
Mm-hmm.
So from what you understand, it sounds like nobody has collected this kind of data, at least not recently.
Yeah.
Not that we're aware of. Yeah, and I think the other thing is people are never asked their opinion, you know, in any, you know, phase of life, actually. And I think given the response to the survey, as you said, we got a very healthy response. People were anxious to talk about their experience. So I think that was very useful just in itself, even aside from the data that we got. That will help inform any advocacy that we do going forward.
Yeah.
So how did you go about developing the survey and also distributing it?
So we developed it with our housing policy working group. We have a variety of people who are experienced with surveys, some who aren't, combining tenants' experiences and what questions we want to have answered that we know we want to have answered as well. It was quite an organic process of just revising, asking what's missing, revising, asking what's missing. And then that survey was developed to be online, so it would have a broad accessibility to most tenants. It was also delivered, though, in person, because we understand that some tenants that we're trying to reach, especially in certain communities, are likely to not be able to access it online. And so showing up to different community events in different neighborhoods across Kingston was a way that we actually got a larger number of responses.
So what did you learn?
Tenancies are almost equally split between corporate landlords and private landlords. I think that was a bit of an eye-opener.
And does that seem unique to Kingston, or is that common in other places from what you know? Like, help us understand the significance of that.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, there is like this notion that like there's a shrinking number of small landlords, and that this is like a group that needs to be protected because, you know, the idea is small landlords have more affordable rentals. We ask these questions trying to divide, like, which experiences do people have with individual landlords, small landlords, and corporate landlords, to actually understand, is there a difference between that? So yeah, what we found in our community is there's pretty even balance between people who are renting from small landlords and corporate landlords, but we also found that there's not a huge difference in affordability. It was actually completely split down the middle. The tenants who were renting from small landlords and corporate landlords equally said that their rent was unaffordable.
So what else did you learn in the survey? What else were you asking?
Well, the data indicated that there is a high rental turnover in Kingston. More than 50% of the tenants that were surveyed have lived in Kingston for more than 6 years, but 75% of tenants had moved in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. So people are, for whatever reason, are not able to stay in apartments for a long time. Mm-hmm. I have a question. Do you think some of that has to do with the number of new apartments that also have no rent control?
Absolutely, yes.
Certainly.
Yeah, every time a tenant leaves a unit, for whether they've been pushed out or chose to leave, the landlord can raise the rent as much as the market will bear, is the expression. And that came about in 1998 when former Premier Mike Harris, a Conservative Premier in Kingston, in Ontario, decided to deregulate vacancy control. So, and then it's gotten worse. In 2018, our current Premier, Doug Ford, stipulated that any new buildings built after 2018 don't have to have any controls on them in terms of the price of rent as well.
So what does that mean?
That means the landlord can raise the rent as much as they possibly can.
Like between each year?
Yep.
Yes.
Every 12 months, they can raise the rent for things built after 2018. And so all of these new buildings we're seeing in our community are ones that are the least likely to be affordable just because they can increase so astronomically.
Yeah.
That's very insightful in terms of contributing. That helps me understand why we might be seeing so much turnover.
Yeah, and another reason is the vacancy rate. In Kingston, it was, I think, 0.8% in 2023. When the survey was done, it's still 0.8% today. So not only are units incredibly hard to afford, but there are hardly any out there. So people who do get pushed out, who are evicted, or who find they can't afford a place any longer, are really in a difficult position.
So I want to hear a bit more about what kinds of policy actions you think could help some of the circumstances and data that you've identified. So is there any other key data you learned or any information you learned from the survey that you wanted to highlight before we talk about what we can do about it?
Yeah, well, one of the questions was about, do you find your apartment too cold or too hot? And there was about, I forget the percentage exactly.
It was 44 or something, 48 actually.
48% of people found them too hot. I forget how many found them too cold, but it was a lot. It was a smaller number of people who found they were too hot. And as we move further and further into the world changing due to climate, this is a situation that's going to be more and more difficult for tenants. Heat is actually the most dangerous aspect of climate change. And if you're a tenant, you have no control over your environment. You have to depend on your landlord to do almost everything that needs to be done to cool your place down. And you can buy a fan if you can afford it. You may be able to buy an air conditioner if you can afford it, but in some cases landlords won't allow you to have an air conditioner. So it's really puts tenants in a difficult spot. So there is a campaign on a number of fronts to try to bring in some kind of policy, either at a provincial level in the Residential Tenancies Act, or on a municipal level as a bylaw within a city to regulate heat in tenant apartments. There are groups all over actually who are now engaged with this, including political parties. Both the NDP in Ontario and the Greens in Ontario have policies around heat. There are a number of municipalities that are working on this. Hamilton was the first one, but also London, St. Catharines, Ottawa, Toronto, they're all working on those.